Hello, Jeffrey Baffo here. Hold on, please. Woo-hoo. Okay, Jeffrey Baffo here, a chess video from HumbleBumble Chess Services. Today is part 2 of the process-driven or decision tree method of playing chess. This is a method where you can play a good move every single time, as long as you do the processes correct. Now, the processes are going to be easy to state, but difficult to master because chess has so many exceptions. Every rule, every situation has can have an exception to it where it just basically turns everything on its head and makes your rule and your little guidance into doo-doo poo-poo. But there are general rules that you can follow, and then as you break those processes down into smaller processes, that's where the skill comes in. That's where your experience will benefit you, and you'll have a greater and greater chance of always getting the questions right and doing the processes right. It's all about percentages because we're human beings. One of the reasons the computer can play so good is it never makes a mistake in its processes. It always follows them correctly. And after years and years of honing those processes, now modern computers can beat anybody. Even Magnus Carlsen, they have basically surpassed human beings and human abilities in most cases for chess. And they do it by following a process perfectly. So you too can, with human limitations, you too can follow a perfect process and greatly increase your chances of producing a good move. Okay, so we talked about the foundational processes of checkmate. You know, you're either going to checkmate the person directly, or you're going to engage in a war of attrition and trade down with a material advantage to yourself, promote a pawn, or use your material advantage to go after checkmate later in the game. So in other words, you may have to fight with the person a long time, but eventually by attrition, you're going to get them to where you're going to be able to overwhelm their king. So it's checkmate now or checkmate later. But there's a whole ocean of things in between those where you have to build your position and get a good position so that you can win material. Now, that winning material is the second foundational process. Winning material does not always win you the game, but it always has to be evaluated in terms of if you cannot, because sometimes winning material ignores other factors in the game that can prove fatal. So in other words, you can win poison material, so you can win a poison pawn, or you can take a knight that's poisoned to accept, and by winning that material, you're ignoring other things that are going on in the board, and that person's going to get an attack even though they are down in material. And when I say material, that means pawns, pieces. You've got a pawn more or a knight more, something. Your army is bigger and stronger than the other guys. But that's the first thing you have to evaluate, is if you can win material, you have to at least look at that and see, unless I can see, grave consequences, very serious drawbacks to winning material, always win material. Make that your default choice. And if you win material you shouldn't have, and like you say, you ignored another process and it cost you the game, that's a learning point. But I would make your default position to win material and then worry about positional factors overwhelming material. When do those situations come up? Worry about that later. But first, win the material, and then you can evaluate whether or not that was smart later. Now, I used to call the next 3 processes the 3 questions, getting kind of kung fu-y there, but I changed it into the 3 missions. So at any point in your chess game, on every move, there's 3 things that you have to decide whether or not which one of these 3 things you're doing. And let me get the visual aid up there. Okay, so they're basically, you're either decided that your mission is to attack or defend or to build up / wait. Because believe it or not, sometimes you can't really do anything productive on the board. You just kind of have to make a waiting move and just kind of hold on and make a temporary kind of a holding move. Those cases are kind of rare, but they come up more than you might imagine. But let's decide what are those three things you think you're going to do. And basically, there's no easy way to say when one is appropriate and one is not appropriate. There are hints that you can gather from the position that can let you know whether or not you should be attacking, defending, or building up. But the bottom line is there's so many different exceptions and so many possibilities that basically your experience is going to be your guide. So in other words, if you think from your experience in playing chess that this is an attacking situation, go with that. And then go with it until you're proved wrong. And then if you are proved wrong, go back and tinker with it and find out, okay, I thought it was attacking, but I really wasn't. What factors should I have paid attention to? So that's your first process, is decide whether or not you're attacking, defending, or building up. Now, we're going to cover the first two, attacking and defending, and building up is a little bit deeper, and that's going to have its own video. So basically, when you're attacking and defending, there are six, well, I shouldn't say six. There's six of each types of attacking and defending moves. Whoa. Okay, so if you're, and you will notice that a lot of time, in some of these cases, the tool or weapon or so, if you will, is on both lists. And that's not a mistake. That's because these are important moves that you should be looking at every single time. The first one is capturing. It can be an attacking or a defending move. If you're, so you want to always be alert to an undefended or underdefended piece. So in other words, if a piece is undefended and you can capture it, you should capture it unless you can understand that there's a good reason not to. That poison material that we talk about, poison pawn, poison knight, whatever. So if you can see a good reason to take the piece, not to take the piece, don't take it. But if you can't, go ahead and capture it. So it could be attacking or defending. A pin can be, again, an offensive or a defensive weapon. And basically, the definition of a pin is three pieces in a line. And that line could be a file, a rank, or a diagonal. And the piece in between the outer two pieces is the enemy piece. And the back piece is, your piece is on the front end, attacking that middle piece. And the middle piece is shielding the piece behind it. And the factor of the pin comes into play when that piece behind it is either unguarded or more valuable. So in other words, if that shielding piece, that piece that's in between moves, it exposes the piece behind it to capture. There are two types of pins, relative and absolute. Relative means that if the bishop is pinning a knight and the knight is shielding a queen, well, the queen's value relative to the bishop is much higher. So that's a relative pin. Absolute pin means it's pinned to the king. And by the laws of chess, you cannot move the pinned piece. It's an absolute pin. Then the next is to run. So in other words, this is for defensive moves. I apologize, the first one there. Defensive moves to just run, to move the piece away from danger. If it's attacked, move it away. Block. So in other words, you can block a piece. That's kind of like putting a piece into a pin, so to speak, but at least it saves that piece that was threatened. So that's a way to save that piece. Again, you have to evaluate whether or not it's a smart choice, but it is one of the choices you should be looking at. And then defend. So in other words, the piece might need a protector on it. So if it's attacked once, you bring in one protector or defender. It's attacked twice, you bring in 2, 3, etc. Now, the general rule is that if it's attacked the same number of times as it's defended, the defender will make the last capture and they will win that exchange. Now, it depends on what pieces are being exchanged, of course. So if you're an attacker, the general rule is you have to have one more attacker in order to win the day on that. Okay. And counter threat. Now, counter threat is our favorite, and as you can see, or as you will come to understand, the counter threat is the perfect pivot point between the two worlds, the world of attack and the world of defense. Because if we can defend by going over to the attack, that's the best option, and we always want to pursue that if it's available. Now, sadly, it's not always available, but if it's there, that's the one we want to do. So in other words, you attack my pawn, I attack your knight. You attack my knight, I attack your rook. You attack my rook, I threaten checkmate. So in other words, I have a bigger threat than yours. I have a counter threat that's more compelling than what you're doing, and that's a way of defending. But it's also a way of flipping the script and going over to the attack. Okay, now let's cover the attacking moves. Capture, as we talked about the defense. If there's an undefended or underdefended piece, capture it. That's a good attacking method. You're going to get that bigger army. Check. Now, checks are kind of tricky. Checks are the attack on the king. You have to answer that check, that attack. So it limits the person's options. And when the person has limited options, it's easier for you to calculate further ahead when they have limited options. Now, there's a couple different kinds of checks. There's just the regular check, there's the discovered check, and then there's the double check. There's also a discovered double check. So double check is extremely powerful. It attacks, the king is attacked twice and can only get out of that check by moving the king. The discovered check means you're moving one piece and uncovering from behind that piece a check of another piece. Very powerful as well. Okay. Another attacking thing is the what's called the fork. Now, I don't like fork because it implies, or I just shouldn't say I don't like it, but it's not super accurate because it implies just like a fork in the road, like two different choices. Basically, what the fork stands for is a multiple attack. You're attacking, most of the times it's two things, but sometimes it's two or three or four different things. So you're making what's called a multiple attack. And there was a chess thinker, a chess strategist that made the statement of that all forks or all tactics are basically some form of multiple attack. And Grandmaster Yasser Serwan thought that was a pretty bold statement, and he thought about it, and he said, actually that's true. The bottom line is any tactic that wins material is going to be some form of a multiple attack. Any piece can do a multiple attack, including a pawn or a king. Knights are famous for it because their moves are non-linear and the multiple attacks are very hard to stop. But forks are multiple attacks. Pawn tricks. Now, pawn tricks are, of course, unique to the pawn. There's the en passant capture. There's the pawn fork. There's the pawn wave or pawn storm, where the pawns come forward together and they kind of, like army ants, they sweep everything before them. And then there's the promotion of a pawn. So when you think about it, that's a 8 or 9 point swing. So a pawn at 1 point of value in the material scale becomes a queen 9 points. That's a pretty big shift in the balance of power. So pawn promotions are incredibly powerful when you can get them. Most of the times they happen in an endgame. We talked about earlier the war of attrition, where you basically whittle the other person down and then you queen a pawn and then you use that queen to win the game. Then another attacking move is the setup. So in other words, it's not a direct attacking move, but it's a move that enables an attacking move. So in other words, you're setting up a pin, you're threatening a pin, you're threatening a fork. That's one of the attacking moves. Now the building, like I said, building up is so deep, that's going to require its own video, but this is going to be in part 2 of the process-driven or decision tree method of selecting a good move. Thanks for your attention. Stay tuned for part 3, and as always with my multi-part systems, I'm going to link the different parts once they're all created and posted. As they say in the intro, and people always say, if I'm a YouTube creator, what I want my audience to do, if they liked what I did, is to like, comment, share, and subscribe. So I appreciate if you would do those things if you think my videos are worthy. Thanks again. Have a great day.